It's not unusual to find old swords in a pawn shop. Some, of course, are nicer than others, but what caught Chip Harrington's eye is that this one used to belong to a naval officer.
Okay, so how much do you want for this beauty?
I don't know, I was thinking maybe 200 bucks.
Let me call up someone who actually knows what they're talking about.
Rome built an empire on iron and blood. For centuries, gladiators carried blades that decided who lived and who died inside the arena. One of those blades, authenticated, ancient, and valued at a number that defies belief, walked through the doors of a Las Vegas pawn shop. Rick Harrison had seen rare pieces before, but this one stopped him cold, not because of its age, because of what was hidden in its history, and the price attached to it made him do something he had almost never done before. Most people think of Roman gladiators as performers, men in armor fighting for crowds. But the weapons they carried were not props. They were tools of survival, and almost none of them made it to the modern world intact. According to the 2018 Journal of Roman Archaeology, across the empire's 500-year peak, historians have recorded an estimated 40,000 gladiatorial combats, tens of thousands of blades used, broken, melted down, buried, lost. Of all of those, fewer than 60 confirmed edged weapons have ever passed modern archaeological authentication. 60. From 40,000 fights spanning 5 centuries. That number alone tells a story about what walked into the gold and silver pawn shop that day. The sword was identified by the first examiner on site as a Gladius Hispaniensis, the short, double-edged, thrusting blade that became the standard weapon of the heavily armored secutor class. Not a display piece. Not a ceremonial object, a fighting blade. Its dimensions matched arena use specifications almost exactly. A blade length of approximately 64 centimeters, narrow enough for close quarters, weighted toward the tip for penetrating force. Metallurgical analysis of its iron core revealed something harder to fake than shape. The carbon distribution and slag inclusions inside the metal-matched forged signatures consistent with Roman-era smelting techniques that disappeared from practice after the 5th century AD. Modern reproductions cannot replicate that internal structure without leaving traces. This one left none. Dating placed the sword between 150 and 180 AD. That is the reign of Marcus Aurelius, a period when the Roman arena was at the height of its cultural power, drawing crowds of 50,000 into the Colosseum for a single event. Along the tang, the narrow metal extension that fits inside the handle, faint etchings were visible under magnification. Those markings were cross-referenced against the Vatican Museum's 2003 Gladiatorial Arms Registry, a catalog compiled from artifacts held across 14 European institutions. The stamp matched a known imperial workshop designation. The seller carried his documentation in a plain manila folder. Inside, records claiming the sword had been acquired by his family through a 1962 estate auction in Naples. He presented it calmly, confidently, but what that folder did not contain, and what the seller chose not to mention, would take 3 independent experts and 6 full days to begin pulling apart. The man who carried that manila folder was not someone who stumbled in off the Las Vegas Strip. According to production notes referenced in a 2022 Smithsonian Channel behind-the-scenes feature, the seller had spent 14 months working through proper channels before he ever set foot in the gold and silver pawn shop. He had contacted Christie's. He had contacted Sotheby's, 2 of the most powerful auction houses on Earth, institutions that between them have handled billions of dollars in rare artifacts over the past century. Both declined to list the piece, not because they doubted its age, because the provenance documentation was not clean enough to put in front of buyers at that level. So he went to Las Vegas. He was 67 years old. A retired antiquities dealer originally based in Zurich, a city that not coincidentally sits at the center of Europe's private art and artifact trade. He did not carry the sword in a bag. He transported it wrapped in acid-free linen, sealed inside a climate-controlled case designed to maintain stable humidity and temperature. That level of care does not come from casual ownership. It comes from someone who has spent decades understanding exactly what he is holding. When he sat down across from Rick Harrison, he did not open with history. He did not open with authentication certificates or folder documents. He opened with a number. $2 billion. Not 200 million. Not 500 million. 2 billion. The kind of figure that does not get said inside a pawn shop without a reason behind it. That reason was a private valuation commissioned in 2021 from Archaeologia Forense SRL, a Rome-based forensic antiquities firm. Their assessment placed the sword inside a category of fewer than 12 surviving authenticated arena-grade gladii anywhere in the world. 12. And if the firm's additional attribution claim held any weight, this particular blade sat above all of them. Rick Harrison has sat across from a lot of sellers, con artists, grieving families, collectors who overvalued heirlooms by a factor of 10. He has heard extraordinary claims before and responded with a calm, practiced skepticism that has defined 23 seasons of television. His first reaction to the $2 billion figure was caught on camera. And it was not the reaction most people expected. It was not disbelief. It was not a laugh. It was something quieter. A stillness. The look of someone who recognized immediately that this situation was going to require more than a counteroffer. 6 days. 3 experts. And a conclusion that no one in that pawn shop was fully prepared for. Pawn Stars producers did not call in one specialist and move on. For a piece carrying a $2 billion valuation and a provenance claim stretching back to 2nd century Rome, they brought in 3 independent voices, each examining a different layer of the same object. What each one found told a completely different part of the story. The first expert was a metallurgical analyst from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. His job was not to look at the sword. His job was to look inside it. Using isotopic analysis, he examined the iron-carbon ratio embedded in the blade's core structure. His findings were unambiguous. The ratio was consistent with pre-medieval Roman forge techniques, a specific combination of carbon distribution and phosphorus traces that modern smelting processes do not naturally produce. To fake, it would require deliberate, precise degradation of the metal at an isotopic level, a process so technically demanding and expensive that no forger operating for profit would attempt it. The blade, at a material level, was exactly what it appeared to be. Ancient, Roman, real. The second expert arrived from Oxford's Faculty of Classics, a classical historian with a specific focus on Roman military equipment and imperial production records. She examined the faint workshop stamp etched along the tang, the same marking that had been cross-referenced against the Vatican registry in initial analysis. Her identification was precise. The stamp matched a known fabrica, an official imperial arms workshop that operated in Capua, in southern Italy between 140 and 190 AD. Capua was not a minor location. It was the city where Rome trained its most elite gladiators, home to the ludus where Spartacus himself had been held before his famous revolt nearly 3 centuries earlier. The historian confirmed the stamp's origin with a confidence that left little room for doubt. 2 experts in, both pointing in the same direction. The sword was genuine. Then the third expert sat down. She was not there to examine the blade at all. She was an international art law attorney brought in specifically to assess the 1962 Naples auction paperwork the seller had carried in that manila folder. Her review took less time than either of the previous assessments. The auction house named in the documents, the institution supposedly responsible for the 1962 estate sale, had been legally dissolved in 1958. For years before the transaction, it was credited with conducting a sale recorded through a company that no longer existed on the date of the sale. That single discrepancy did not prove the sword was stolen. It did not prove the seller was lying. What it did was collapse the entire legal foundation of ownership into a gray zone, one that no licensed American pawn operation could safely enter without exposing itself to federal scrutiny. The metallurgy said the sword was real. The paperwork said the story was not. And sitting exactly between those 2 facts was a $2 billion object that nobody could legally touch. What happened in that room after the attorney delivered her findings is where this story gets far more complicated. $2 billion is not a number that exists anywhere in the recorded history of ancient weapon sales, not even close. To understand how far outside reality that figure sits, consider what the market actually looks like. In 2019, Bonham's auction house sold a Roman pilum, an imperial-era throwing spear, for $1.3 million. That sale made headlines in antiquities circles. It was considered extraordinary, a landmark result for a Roman military artifact with clean provenance and full documentation. $1.3 million was the ceiling the market had ever publicly recorded for an ancient Roman weapon. The British Museum, one of the most authoritative institutions on Earth when it comes to classical antiquities, places surviving gladiatorial gladii in an estimated range of $8 million to $45 million, and that upper figure applies only to pieces with completely intact, unimpeachable provenance chains. Most authenticated examples sit far below it. So, the distance between $45 million, the most optimistic institutional estimate for the finest possible example, and $2 billion is not a stretch. It is a different category of claim entirely. It requires a justification that goes beyond age, beyond metallurgy, beyond workshop origin. The Archaeologia Forense SRL report contained exactly one argument capable of bridging that gap. Faint engravings had been identified near the hilt of the blade. Not decorative markings, not workshop stamps. Something more specific. A pattern the Rome-based firm's analysts described as consistent with a personal ownership marker. And the ownership marker, they believed it matched, belonged to Commodus. Commodus was Roman emperor from 177 to 192 AD. He is remembered by historians as one of the most unstable rulers the empire ever produced, a man who renamed Rome after himself, declared himself the reincarnation of Hercules, and did something no emperor before or after him ever did. He fought in the arena, not symbolically, not in staged ceremonies with guaranteed outcomes. According to the historian Cassius Dio, writing in Historia Romana, Commodus participated in 735 recorded bouts inside the Colosseum over the course of his reign. He killed animals. He fought gladiators. He used a blade. If the engraving attribution was correct, if that sword had been held by Commodus himself, it would not simply be an ancient weapon. It would be the only confirmed personal arena weapon of a reigning Roman emperor ever recovered. No museum holds one. No government has one. No private collector has ever been able to make that claim with any credible documentation behind it. That is what turns $45 million into $2 billion. Not age, not condition, attribution. Rick Harrison has made significant purchases on camera before. Production records show he has approved transactions in the $500,000 range during filming without requesting additional time. After reading the Commodus attribution section of the Archaeologia Forense SRL report, he went quiet. Not briefly. According to those present during filming, the silence lasted nearly 4 minutes. Then he stood up, and he walked out of his own shop. Some people watching that moment assumed it was theater, a negotiating move, Rick Harrison creating distance to bring the price down. It was not. In over 600 documented episodes across 23 seasons of Pawn Stars, production insiders cited in a 2023 Las Vegas Review-Journal profile noted that Rick Harrison had physically left an active appraisal fewer than 5 times on camera. 5 times. Across more than 2 decades of filming. It is not a tactic he reaches for. When Rick walks, something has genuinely crossed a line he will not step over. In this case, the line was not the price. It was not the Commodus attribution. It was not even the dissolved auction house, though that alone would have killed most deals. It was the 1970 UNESCO Convention. The full title is the Convention on the Means of Prohibiting and Preventing the Illicit Import, Export, and Transfer of Ownership of Cultural Property. Under its framework, any artifact that cannot be demonstrated to have left its country of origin before 1970, with clean, verifiable documentation, is legally vulnerable to seizure and forced repatriation, regardless of how many private hands it has passed through since. The sword's paperwork named an auction house that did not exist in 1962, which meant the pre-1970 provenance chain had a hole in it large enough to drive a federal case through. Italy's Ministry of Culture does not treat that framework as a technicality. Between 2000 and 2022, Italian authorities recovered over 3,000 objects from American private collections and institutions under exactly this legal mechanism. Museums, galleries, individual collectors, none of them were immune. The Getty Museum in Los Angeles spent years in legal disputes with the Italian government over pieces acquired in good faith that later failed provenance scrutiny. Rick Harrison is not a museum with a legal department and government relations staff. He runs a pawn shop. If he purchased the sword, took ownership, and the paperwork subsequently collapsed under investigation, the gold and silver pawn shop would not face a civil dispute. It would face federal forfeiture proceedings, the kind that do not end with a settlement, the kind that end with the object disappearing into a government evidence facility and the buyer absorbing the full financial loss. He did not walk out in frustration. He did not walk out to make a point. He walked out because remaining in that room, continuing that conversation, meant remaining inside a deal that had no legally safe conclusion. Staying was the risk. Leaving was the only move that protected everything he had built. What happened to the sword after that day has never been fully confirmed. The seller left Las Vegas without a deal, without a buyer, and without, as far as anyone publicly knows, any plan to try again through the same channel. What happened to the sword after filming Wrapped has never been officially confirmed by any party involved. Not the production, not the seller, not any authenticating institution. What exists is a single anonymous source quoted in a 2023 collector forum thread archived by Antique Dealers Quarterly familiar with the production. That source suggested the sword was transported to Geneva shortly after the Las Vegas visit concluded. Geneva is not a random destination for an object in legal limbo. The city operates under a Freeport designation, a legal framework that allows cultural artifacts, fine art, and high-value objects to be stored indefinitely within its borders without triggering import declarations or ownership transfer laws. It is a system designed, at least officially, for transit storage. In practice, it has become something else entirely. According to a New York Times investigation, Geneva's Freeport facilities housed over $100 billion worth of art and antiquities as of 2022, much of it sitting in temperature-controlled vaults for years, sometimes decades, with ownership questions deliberately left unresolved. A blade with a broken provenance chain and a $2 billion attribution claim fits that environment precisely. It is valuable enough to store. It is legally complicated enough that moving it openly would invite scrutiny. And in a Geneva Freeport vault, it can simply wait. For what, exactly, remains unclear. Maybe you have seen something like this in your own life, an object, an inheritance, a piece of family history that carried a story nobody could fully prove and nobody was willing to let go of. Something that sat in a drawer or a storage unit for years because the truth around it was too complicated to untangle cleanly. The Archaeologia Forense SRL report has not been released to the public. The seller has not given a single interview since the filming took place. The Commodus attribution, the one claim that separates this sword from every other ancient artifact on Earth, the claim that justifies a number no weapon has ever carried, has never been submitted to a peer-reviewed institution for independent verification. Not once. Some stories reach a conclusion. A court ruling. A museum acquisition. A confession. Something that closes the loop and tells you what was real and what was not. This one does not. It ends with a locked vault door somewhere in Switzerland, a blade wrapped in acid-free linen, and a question that the only people who could answer it have chosen not to. The sword is somewhere. The Commodus attribution is unverified, and the seller has never spoken publicly. The thread is still being pulled, and what is on the other end may change how this story is remembered entirely.